But other than that, we have no other really big announcements. So I will give it away to our first guest speaker, Tom Burdak, if you'd like to introduce yourself.
Hi, so I'm Tom Burdak, and I've come visit EGS several times over the years. I graduated from Drexel back in 2012 out of the CS department with a bachelor's and master's CS department. And I went on to work at Microsoft for my entire career up to this point. So I've been at Microsoft about a decade. I've worked in mostly Xbox the entire time. I have shipped several different titles. We worked on Project Spark originally, which is kind of like a game creation tool. If you took Minecraft and Little Big Planet and kind of mashed the two up together, that's basically Project Spark. And I worked on that for a while, and then I worked on several Halo titles. Worked at 343, the bulk of my career at Microsoft, shipping Halo 4, Halo 5, Halo Infinite, Halo Wars 2, several different titles. Most recently, though, I left the Xbox work. Over the last couple of years, I've been working in the VR and AR, mixed reality. So doing things centered around HoloLens, virtual reality, and the kind of the intersection of 2D, 3D, in kind of like the metaverse sense before really metaverse was a big topic. And so that's basically me. And at this point, I now actually am adjunct teaching here at Drexel. So this is my first term teaching in the GMAT department, which was pretty exciting. I enjoyed getting to meet several students and work with people and starting to kind of give back to Drexel after all this time having graduated.
That's cool. Thank you. Feel free if you want to just, I guess, get into what you wanted to talk about today. You're welcome to.
Sure. So mostly what I wanted to talk about is centered around kind of like the avenues of game development that are not as I guess as popular or well known. So in the traditional past, where game devs tends to be to go work for a AAA studio or an indie studio or something they got to work on console or PC games. And there's a lot of new opportunities for students that are going to be graduating out of game dev programs in spaces that aren't as prototypical game dev, right? So things like virtual reality, augmented reality, serious games, things like that. So one of the projects that I worked on here at Microsoft is what's called the IVAS program, which is essentially the HUD 2.0 stuff for the military. So basically, essentially trying to grant the military many of the capabilities that you would expect in Halo, right? Which is like heads-up displays, being able to have geospatial information about battlefields and all that kind of stuff. And that these kind of areas are actually really interesting because it's solving 3D typical like 3D game dev kinds of problems, but it's the problem space isn't for entertainment. It's for more of a purposeful thing. So like military, or in the case of the metaverse stuff that is really becoming a buzzword and a popular thing with Facebook and Microsoft all kind of vying for that space. There's tons of jobs that are going to be opening up for game developers that aren't really labeled as game developer jobs. And so it's kind of an interesting thing that it's the talent and the skill set that you're going to get as a graduate from a game program it is very applicable to these things. But a lot of these companies, Microsoft excluded because Microsoft does have Xbox, so they know what game devs are. A lot of these other companies, they don't really know game dev per se. Facebook's a good example because I've actually been recruited a couple of times by Facebook because they're trying to ramp up their division, and they don't know what to look for 3D devs other than to try and poach people from Microsoft or poach people from Google. But they don't really know like what they're looking for in terms of like talent pools and like who to market to. And so I kind of wanted to just like discuss a little some of the options that like you can have outside of games that still is interesting and fun to work in, but is not necessarily specifically the game space. So I can't talk a whole lot about the military stuff, but I can talk about a bit of the metaverse and the teams. There's the new Teams mesh kind of thing that I got announced at Microsoft, and what that is trying to bring the QD world, so what we typically experience through through a computer monitor, keyboard, mouse, trying to bridge that gap between that and something that is kind of a virtual space. And I got very passionate in this space over the last few years because of the pandemic. And not just that, but also because I work remote. I've been remote now for a couple of years and don't. So my teams are out in Redmond, Washington, and I'm out here in the Philadelphia area. And so being remote provides some interesting, unique challenges. Even outside of the normal challenges you would think of, which is like having to have meetings like that are asynchronous or over 2D like video conferencing stuff. There's social as well as just like personal kind of differences and issues that you kind of face when you're a remote worker, right? Because when we go back to the office, which we kind of are now, I have like team members that are like, they're having hallway conversations and doing things in spaces that are, like common grounds, like over at Microsoft campus. And this whole like metaverse idea is very interesting because it's trying to bridge the gap between what would be a typical like workplace or a typical experience that is like either you're with people and around people or you're in an awkward online through Teams or Skype or Zoom to communicate and be with people. And that is kind of not really the future, right? The future is this blended world where you're able to have some people that can don a VR headset and be completely immersed in a space. And you can have people that are going to pop on a HoloLens and be semi-immersed in a space where there's holograms representing people that are not in your space, that are kind of remote somewhere else. But there's also the people around you that you see and are aware of because it's augmenting reality. And then there's the people that are in offices that are like in conference rooms and such that they're meeting physically in person, but they're able to see holograms by putting on like HoloLens and stuff like that. And it's a lot of the work that we're doing like right now with like mesh and things like that at Microsoft is trying to figure out how do we kind of blend those worlds together. How do we be able to have someone put on a HoloLens or put on a VR headset and feel like they're a part of that team and like they're there? And it's that entire experience and the abilities to do that is powered 100% by game devs. So the people that are around me that I work on a daily basis, like the vast majority of us come from Xbox or we come from Sony or we come from various game studios to come together to actually solve for a lot of these 3D problems. Because typical software is very 2D. It's very mouse, keyboard, screen. And that's not the future if you think about it. Like a future is much brighter than a simple monitor and a keyboard and a mouse. And so there's a lot of opportunities that are kind of starting to come about and that I think are going to continue to grow for people to look at spaces like VR, look at like AR, and apply their skill sets to these kind of areas to help push forward what it means to be connected in a world that all too often lately is so disconnected. So I just kind of wanted to like talk a little bit about that. I also really wanted to kind of give this like as like an AMA for me anyway, like because I've taken a long journey so far over the last decade through console games to PC games to now like VR and all that kind of stuff. And I feel like my value to you guys is to ask me questions like and for me to give you some answers. So that's mainly why I'm here, to talk a little bit about the metaverse, promote what I do, and also ask some questions.
Cool. Well, I guess I'll kick it off with a question I have. If anyone wants to like think about any questions they have. Something that I've always found really interesting about the idea of like VR and HoloLenses is kids who are growing up in this generation where that's going to start becoming the normal. And I guess like both just like their perception of technology and like any ethical concerns that people have about like how technology is starting to affect different generations. I guess, is that something that you guys are thinking about in your development, or is there someone else in your department thinking about that? I'm just like really curious.
Yeah, that's actually a really good question. So as a parent, I already see this. I mean, I can remember me getting yelled at in the car because I have a flashlight on my shoulder trying to play my original Game Boy. Like getting yelled at by my dad, turn the light off so you don't die in a car crash. And the world's very different right now, like because like my daughters are growing up with technology that's just like ubiquitous everywhere. Like they're they're just so used to tablets and phones and cameras and all this stuff like around, and they just don't even like think twice about it. It's like a totally like this is the norm, right? Whereas like a lot of people, us that came from the time when you know that wasn't the norm. It's like, wow, how far have we come? My, how far. In terms of like Microsoft and VR and AR, there's a lot of conversations around like ethics and privacy and what does that mean in the real world, right? So the power of like a HoloLens is in that it provides spatial awareness of what's around you. And so when you think about that, what it means is there's little cameras that are on the front of a HoloLens. There's little cameras that are kind of in the front of a HoloLens, right? And those cameras are utilized to make the device itself aware of what's around you. So what it's using basically depth cameras and various different technologies in the cameras to determine like, oh, there's a wall there, there's a table there, and to recognize these various components to build out what's considered an environmental mesh, right? So which is the navigable space for holograms and the environment that the HoloLens can be aware of. And with that kind of technology comes a lot of concerns around privacy and around security, because these are always on. Like it's required, right? Otherwise, the HoloLens isn't going to work. It's not going to recognize your hands or anything. And so as these devices become more and more portable and become more mainstream, which is an inevitable thing, like everybody should know, everybody wants to get there. Technology is keeping us from it right now. Just inventions are required, but the goal is to get to that place where anybody can have them. And if you think, I don't know if anybody remembers the Google Glass, but Google Glass went through a lot with a lot of security issues and privacy concerns, and there was different like establishments, restaurants, and stuff like that, which just like ban them because it's basically just a camera on your face. Well, things like the HoloLens or VR headsets, Quest, all these kind of things, they're using these cameras to be aware of what's around you because that's how they function. And those devices then in turn are a vector of attack against humanity, right? Like your privacy. If you could think of the worst case scenario of a world where there are headsets on, you know, like 50% of the population, like just so with 50% of the population has headsets and they're wearing them. If a nefarious entity, such as a country or something like that, were to hack into the network of those systems, they basically have complete surveillance and facial recognition data for every single person that is publicly moving around in space. And so those are like extremely big concerns in the industry as a whole, right? Not just Microsoft, but Facebook, Valve, anybody that's building these devices is facing these same things. And so there's a lot of conversations around like standardizing around that and like what does it mean to provide a safe and private experience while still being able to give technology the capabilities to do what it is that it wants to do to expand our world and what it means to be connected to.
That's really cool. Thank you. Does anyone else have any questions they'd like to ask? I know Frank is coming up. I'll move out of your way, Frank.
Hey, Frank.
Well, let me just, I guess, sort of talk about one thing, which is Tom. I have deep affection for Tom. He was one of my first students that I worked very closely with as when I was back at EGS, reading his resume, when applying for co-op at Microsoft Studios and so on, and maintaining touch. And Tom has also paid back when he was in Seattle, whenever he would come to Philadelphia, he would give us time to talk to EGS students. And now, Tom, as a full-time employee at Microsoft, doesn't have to teach at Drexel. This is his way of trying to give back to Drexel, and it's appreciated for it. So what I want to do is feel free to ask any questions you have. As a former graduate of Drexel, as someone working as a full-time software programmer, hopefully engage outside the game. So let's think in and have you guys think about this you ask. And what I want to ask you, Tom, is, so before Zuckerberg said metaverse is the future, no one has really heard of metaverse except maybe those people who read Snow Crash and so on. So before that, we basically talked about VR, augmented reality, virtual reality, even extended reality, mixed reality. They're all the terms that we use, talk about very similar things. So now Facebook has basically gone kind of all in on this sort of concept. What has changed? I mean, has the field changed? What does the term like VR and AR sort of mean anything? Or do we just call it the metaverse? What does having that phrase have done to the field and the direction that we're moving forward?
Well, so that's a very good question. Very good question. So interestingly enough, Zuckerberg did not coin the phrase, and it has been around for quite some time. And in fact, we have referred to Mesh and much of the stuff that we did at Microsoft as metaverses, right? And so what Facebook has done is Facebook has chosen to take the first proverbial shot in the public eye of what the future could be in a VR, AR, mixed reality kind of space, right? So metaverse, the best thing I can kind of describe in what Facebook's version of a metaverse is, and this is information that I've just gathered from working with Facebook to the extent that we do for shared standards and stuff within the space, as well as things that they've presented publicly, both at Oculus Connect, which I usually go to, and stuff like that. And what their idea of a metaverse is essentially what Microsoft has been calling the mixed reality, right? And what it is the metaverse is a space, a connected space in that people can share, connect, and experience together in this kind of world, right? So metaverse is an interesting term because really there's going to be many metaverses, right? Like a metaverse is really just a single universe in the sense that it is like a shared fabric of connectivity. So you can think of Facebook as trying to build a metaverse. Yes. What metaverse are they trying to build? Well, Facebook, right? Like they're trying to build the Facebook metaverse, Horizon and stuff like that. Whereas Microsoft, what we are working on is we're working on, so there's the Teams metaverse, right? So that's like the space where utilizing Teams and the full ecosystem that is going to power Teams, which there is what there is now, and then there's obviously going to be much more. I can't talk about all the things that are going to be there, but you can guarantee there's going to be more than just what's shipped right now. And so like the Teams metaverse, whatever that evolves, whatever it gets called, whatever is another metaverse, right? And so when it comes to like metaverses, it's trying to coin the community and the platform that is going to connect all these devices. So when you talk about VR and you talk about AR and these different things, you're talking about the device, right? So you're talking about the client, the endpoint, the thing that connects to this metaverse. And in a true metaverse, that endpoint could be many different things. It could be VR, it could be a phone, it could be an AR headset. It could be a watch, like it could be any number of these different devices that are going to connect and have some kind of experience and some kind of representation into that metaverse. And so metaverse is, to me, a little bit of a loaded term in that it doesn't really know what it wants to be, right? It's a way to throw a big word on top of a whole large area of research and experimentation and prototyping and psychological research and things like that, to just kind of do a blanket statement of like, well, this is the metaverse, like we're investing in this metaverse. When in reality, what it really is to me is it's investing in knowing that we have all these new devices, these new ways that we're going to be able to interact with the world. That's not just a phone in our hand or a PC in front of us. And it's acknowledging the fact that this means that we have to figure out a way to bring all those devices together such that you can all share in a similar experience. If you think of things like Xbox or PlayStation or any of these communities, right? The Xbox world is Xbox Live, right? And so you have friends Xbox Live. There's things that you can do, shared experiences you can do. It's actually kind of a very small metaverse. But the problem is the only entry point really is like a Windows PC or an Xbox, right? And so what Metaverse is doing is taking this concept that's already existed in games for quite some time, which is a shared network of people, and adding more endpoints and bringing more richness to the world. Because if you think about like the Xbox, when you go into the dashboard to navigate to an experience, the connected fabric of your friends, like they're all online, is pretty minimal, right? Like it's basically like you could have chat going on and stuff like that. But there's not like a hub world or like a space that you all just exist in that you can move around and participate in and do like have experiences in. And what a metaverse is trying to do is that, right? You could think of taking Xbox Live and creating a hub world that's always there that everyone can meet in and could go do things in. That is a metaverse, right? And so to me, like the term metaverse is simply trying to coin the idea of taking something that exists already, which is Xbox Live or Facebook or Twitter or these communities of connected people, and providing a more immersive and quality experience that is connected together in a way that you can just enter into that metaverse and you're there, right? You immediately have an experience besides just some simple UI, right? And that's kind of what all of us are in the process of trying to figure out. Well, how do we do that? Right? There's immense problems to solve in that kind of thing. And so Altspace, I don't know if anybody's ever heard of it, but Altspace VR is like a social and events platform that is in VR, so you can get like Steam VR, Oculus, all that stuff, and it's put out by Microsoft. I actually worked on that team for quite a bit of time early on in my time in mixed reality, and so it is a metaverse, right? So it is the Allspace metaverse. And so you go in and you're immediately placed into your home space. That's your own private space that you can invite people to. There's hub worlds to be able to go to and experience like campfire, or go to these shared spaces to go like hang out and meet new people, engage with your friends that you're used to seeing. Then there is events that you can go to that are more like they're either ticketed events or they're like kind of instance experiences where you would go to a thing and an event is being put on by a performer, or it could be like they have for virtual church is one of the things that happens, and they have like LGBTQ meetups and all kinds of stuff like that. And so that's a part of it. And then you have these worlds, and people can create worlds, and they can create interesting experiences within the worlds, games, all that kind of stuff. And so you can go experience those kind of things. And to me, that's like what a metaverse is now, but there's much more that it can be, right? Because that metaverse does not play well with someone on a HoloLens. It does great for VR. It does okay for phone and for PC and stuff, the 2D experience. But it's not really great for HoloLens, right? Because when you put on a HoloLens, you are bounded by the real world around you, right? You can't just be like, oh, that's some interesting stuff going on over there. I'm just going to teleport with my controller over to that area. Not quite the same. If you go into a space and you are like, I'm at my desk right now. If I go into a space and like there's cool stuff that's in front of me that I can't walk to go to because there's a physical desk in my way, in VR, you would just move the controller forward and you would just move forward. You don't have those kind of things in AR. AR has a much more restrictive much more restrictive experience. Because immersive is much more difficult to do. Blacks do not render correctly in HoloLens, right? So like if somebody has like a bunch of black in their scene, like it's gonna look terrible on a HoloLens. And so we have to do things different on a HoloLens. That means that the experience that is built from the ground up to be immersive is not great on an AR device. And so when you say, I want to build a metaverse, what you're saying is, I want to build an experience that has some equal footing across all of these different endpoints, and has ways for all of these things to be able to participate and to connect and to have these kind of shared experiences.
I guess going off of, because Frank mentioned that you work full-time at Microsoft and have kind of transitioned to teaching as like just branching off and spreading knowledge. And correct me if I'm wrong, you've were teaching a course this past term, right? Like you were teaching at Drexel?
3. I had 3 classes this last term, yeah.
Oh, wow. I guess you've worked with students that are like in the classroom and don't have a lot of commercial experience, and you yourself have a lot of actually in the development space experience. And I've always felt like there's like a gap of like trying to get from working on a class project to working on like a commercial project. I didn't know if you had any advice for like that transition point of like, if you're getting hired somewhere, like good advice for onboarding or joining someone else's pipeline, or just in general, like the difference between working on a class project and working on a commercial project. Anything of that vein that you could give advice on?
Sure. The gap, it depends on where you're going from Drexel. So if you're going into indie or into like a really small studio, it can feel a little bit more natural. Like going from Drexel to there, because you're already accustomed to working in smaller projects, smaller teams, and kind of sharing the breadth of knowledge across the whole thing, because you only have a small number of people working on it. If you're transitioning to a larger project, kind of like what I did going to Microsoft, it becomes a little bit more difficult. So when I interned at Microsoft as a part of the co-op at Drexel, that was when I interned on Project Spark, and at that point it was just a research project. It was only like 7 of us, I think, on it, and so it felt kind of just like college. I was like, this isn't a whole lot different. I mean, it is going to get paid, but it wasn't a ton different in terms of like skill sets, and like the fact that like you're kind of doing a little bit of everything, and it's a smaller team. When I was finished that, when I came back to a fully green lit production product that had a lot of people on it, and so it's still kind of felt very indie, and it's still like I was still able to focus on a couple different areas, but like you're starting to learn to specialize. It wasn't until I went to 343, and if I had graduated and gone directly into 343, it would have been the same exact experience. When you go to like a large studio that's doing AAA, like they're shipping a major title, it's a very different world, right? You now have when I came onto Halo, we were in the middle of, it was right about the time they were shipping Halo 4, and it's at that point you have 600 people plus in the studio. There were 150 engineers alone on the project. And so what happens when you come into like really big studios like that is you learn that it's a very hyper-focal experience. Like being a generalist is not something that really happens, especially early in your career, because the few people that actually fit a generalist role, which I actually was one of the few people that hugged that role for quite some time, is you need to have a high level of experience to be a generalist at a large studio, because you have to be good at everything. And the reason that you are a generalist is because you're basically the firefighter that's going wherever it needs to go, right? But in general, you're going to be kind of hyperfocal. And so what happens is you pick a discipline. A lot of times you pick it at college because you just happen to like that particular area, and your either your portfolio or your experience kind of guides you through that. I was always interested in like gameplay stuff, and doing networking and things like that, and naturally that's where I fit going into a studio. But it really gets hyperfocal when you start getting to the big studios, because they need groups, like teams of people, to do one specific thing and do that thing very well, very quickly, and at a very high bar quality. And so you'll think like there's a UI team, and that UI team, they are focused on nothing but building out UI tooling, UI pipelines, all that kind of stuff, like the UI for the game. And that's all they're going to do. There's no like cross-pollination of work, with the exception of maybe working on a really closely, like a close sister system. Like I did when I was working on the UI team for a while. I was working on there because I had graphics background, so I was doing the DirectX 12 port at the time. And so like you still end up focusing, like you become very focal, and what that means is like you become a specialist in kind of an area, right? And that can be a bad thing if you don't like that area. It can also be a bad thing if you like working in other areas. And that's one of the reasons why I pushed so hard to be a generalist personally, was because I liked working on all aspects of a game. Like I didn't like being shoehorned in one thing. But unfortunately, when you take that route, like you're signing up for you're signing up for a whole world of hurt if you're like, I want to be a generalist and I want to work across the entire stack, because then that's going to be, oh cool, well the graphics pipeline's on fire, guess where you're going, and you end up, might as well just have a firefighter's hat, which that was the running joke at the 343, is you have the hat would move around the studio, who got to fight fires that day. And so like you end up doing that kind of stuff. So transitioning from Drexel or any college into AAA games, it can be a little bit of a whirlwind experience, because all of a sudden you're going from kind of doing a little bit of everything, but not like necessarily completely like specializing on a thing, to being like, this is the thing that I'm going to live and breathe until this game ships, or you knock on someone's door and ask to go do something else, and they so graciously let you because they have the capability to do that, or they're in a place in the product cycle to do that. But like in terms of it, I definitely could give a little bit of advice, because if I were to give myself advice back when I was at Drexel, still in class with Frank Lee, I would tell myself that, like, to figure it out what it is that I like in games, what is it that drives my passion, and what is it that I enjoy most about game development, and pursue that, right? Don't try and focus on being good at everything, or to be someone that can do a little bit of everything, and figure out like what you really like to do. That doesn't mean ignore everything else, like totally don't ignore everything else, but find where your passion lies, because what's going to happen as you progress in your career and get to bigger studios, bigger projects, if what you have worked toward and become specialized in isn't what you're passionate about, it's going to be a much less enjoyable experience than if it is an area that you are passionate about. And that's kind of one of the things that I learned early on, because I kind of liked all things, but there were certain areas I was a little more passionate in, and I didn't invest more time in those areas. And it meant that I didn't get to work in the areas that I wanted to when I got to the bigger studios, because, well, I didn't have the expertise in that area. I was more pigeonholed towards something else. And so what I'd say is, like, as a part of your schooling, it's good to discover the things that you're good at, the things that you like to do, and to make sure that you focus at least some of your skill development on that, to make yourself excel at that, and then market yourself with those skills. If you want to go build rendering, if you really love shaders, right? You just absolutely love doing shaders and math and all that stuff, like, get really good at writing shaders. Get really good at it. Understand graphics pipelines in Unreal, understand them in Unity, even if that means you have to learn a little bit outside of class. Like, that is on you to progress your career. I've learned very much. Don't limit yourself just to what's in class. And so understand those graphics pipelines, understand how to write those shaders, get very good at it, because you'll have more likelihood to have success in that if you're skilled at it coming into the world. Because even if you're coming out of college and people know that it's a college hire, like they're not expecting you obviously to be a seasoned dev, they are going to try and figure out what your strengths and weaknesses are and use that, right? Like, you don't generally, coming in as a college hire, get to pick where you work. They're going to put you where it makes most sense based on your skills. And if you come in with a lot of shader background, and you're able to be like, hey, like, check out all those shader toy stuff that I did, and just talking to like the hiring manager about it when you're interviewing and all, that sets you up for more success to go in the area that you want to work in, as opposed to where they're going to fit you in because you don't really speak up or show that you belong in this area.
Thank you. That's all really good advice. We probably have time for one more question if anyone has one. If not, Tom, or Tom Sharp, I know you were also talking earlier today about your excitement for VR. So if you want to jump in with a question before we switch to you, go for it. If not, one last chance. Oh,
Any questions?
This won't be the last time that you see me. I will be making other appearances at EGS especially now that I'm working at Drexel. So.
Yeah. Did you have something you wanted to ask?
Oh, so Tom, you initially planning to teach one class. So how'd you end up with 3?
We'll just say that Rob Lloyd owes me. Owes me a really big one. Actually, he owes me 2 because it's 2 classes I had to take on in addition. It was something with a scheduling issue with who was supposed to teach the class wasn't able to teach it, and so I picked up 2 sections of GMAP 231 and 1 section of 345.
You know what the class?
I will be, huh?
You know what you're teaching next term in the spring?
Yes, I will be teaching 2 sections of GMAT 345. I think it's the Monday sessions, Monday afternoon, Monday evening. Chances are that's what I will be most likely teaching because that aligns best with my skill set would be 345, or I guess it's 392, the advanced scripting one with shaders. So I'll probably be teaching one of those 2 courses most likely moving forward. Until I can finally convince somebody to let me teach the special topic stuff that I will teach.
Are you going to be on campus in the next term?
Next term, I will likely still be remote. There's a lot going on with we're remodeling our house, so like it makes it difficult for me to leave when I have contractors in and out. And so I told Rob I need to do remote for next term. What fall I will be back in with campus though.
But if you are able to make it out this way, let me know. We'll grab lunch.
Oh, for sure. I can totally do that, and I probably will be on campus quite a bit more this coming springtime. But I just won't be teaching.
Well, in that case, thank you so much, Tom Burdak. I keep having to stop myself from just saying Tom because now we have 2 of them here. I guess with that, thank you so much.
Cheers.